We've started the quarterbacks. We've started the running backs. It's almost like we haven't talked about maybe the most important position for us fantasy players. As most leagues are now in the PPR format, we must talk about the most make or break position on your fantasy teams, the wide receivers. Quick plug here, as on Tuesdays and Thursdays, my co-host and I, we released a podcast on the latest, the greatest sports news. You're already on the channel, so go ahead and check that out if you have a second. But today, we're going to count down from 20 to 11 my rankings of your fantasy wide receivers this season. But first, let's get into some honorable mentions, as we're going to start here with Chris Godwin. He had a very productive 2022 season after coming off of his injury in 2021, and we'll know he'll be that heavily targeted slot receiver that he's always been. So the potential is there, right? So it might be a surprise he's here, but with the drop-off in quarterback play, going from the GOAT, who even in his last days, even in today's world, he's still going to be better than either Kyle Trask or Baker Mayfield. There's tons to worry about here for Chris Godwin if the balls are going to be there and on time. If Baker gets the nod, though, I believe he's serviceable enough to make Chris Godwin a wide receiver 3 for our fantasy teams this season. DJ Moore is my other guy. For a guy that's so talented, he's been held back by poor or just mediocre quarterback play his entire career. He's now working with the best quarterback of his professional career, and even though this was a run-heavy offense last season here in Chicago, they should be more pass-focused this season. And if Justin Fields has improved as much as the reports and as much as the coaches are saying he has improved over there in Chicago, DJ Moore could be a low-end wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, if this offense decides to throw the ball a bit more and protect Justin Fields' legs. At number 20, we're going to start our list here with Calvin Ridley, a guy that might be a surprise. But let's not forget, 2 years ago in 2020, he was the wide receiver 5 for our fantasy football teams. The positives here for Calvin Ridley. 1, he's officially reinstated. He can actually get on an NFL field and play football again for us. The last time we saw Ridley, though, like I mentioned, he was a top 5 wide receiver, and he looked like the next superstar at the wide receiver position. He's been an Iron Man for the majority of his career when he hasn't been suspended, and this may be the best quarterback he's had in his career. No shade to Matt Ryan, but for potential and talent-wise, Trevor Lawrence, based off the second half of last season alone, he showed great potential, and if he progresses at all, I believe Ridley could skyrocket. I believe he can go crazy this upcoming season. But the negatives, we do have to worry about the competition there in Jacksonville, as Christian Kirk had an amazing year, a career year, I might add. You still have Evan Ingram. You still have ETN that could take away targets. This team does have some competition there for Calvin Ridley, but I believe he is the alpha, and I believe he should be treated like that. Another thing, I believe if you make this draft pick on draft day, draft him as like a wide receiver 3, as there's going to be some rust, man. There's going to be some rust we saw with Deshaun Watson, taking 800 days off from professional football, coming back. There's going to be some rust there with Calvin Ridley, but I believe once he gets his feet under him, once he gets going, he's going to be back to that wide receiver, that top 5, top 10 wide receiver talent that we've known from Calvin Ridley in his career. As a Browns fan, number 19 was a shock. But I looked at the numbers and I looked deeper and deeper into it. Amari Cooper made sense to be here at my number 19 spot. Last year, it shocked me to say he was the number 10 fantasy wide receiver. But the positives here. Last season, with Jacoby Brissett for the majority of it, he was 12th in red zone and deep targets for the entire year. A positive here, shockingly enough. The receiving core is going to be better here in Cleveland. So he should face less double teams. He was one of the most double-teamed receivers last season. Less pressure this year. He should be able to face more one-on-one coverage, which that's what Amari Cooper does best, as he's one of the best route runners here in the league. If Deshaun Watson can return to any form of his older self that we knew and loved there in Houston, Amari Cooper is going to be a very safe wide receiver 2 this season, with upside, I might add. But I guess we do have to worry about his age. He is going to be turning 30 this season, and another thing is how much rust are we going to get from Deshaun Watson. That's a thing we have to look out here, but for me as a Browns fan, I'm going to be selfish and I'm going to put Amari Cooper here at number 19. Number 17, B. I cheated a little bit, but that's just how close these wide receivers are. DeAndre Hopkins is going to be up next, as last season when he did play after his 6-game suspension, he was the 4th highest in target share among everybody last season. And with how good he played last season, there's no reason to believe he doesn't have at least 1 or 2 of the top years left here in his body, as he's now 31, so we do have to worry, and we do know that Kyler he can miss up to 6 games, he can miss up to 10, maybe the entire season. So we do have to worry who's going to be Hopkins' quarterback here for this season. If it's Kyler, I believe DeAndre Hopkins shoots up these rankings. If Hopkins has Colt McCoy or whoever else at quarterback, this is about an accurate spot here for Hopkins. I will say there is no big competition for him there in Arizona as far as targets. So for that reason, he is still going to be a wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3, based strictly off of Kyler Murray's health. Is he going to be healthy? Is he going to be on the field? We're going to have to see. But for right now, I'm playing it safe. Hopkins is going to be my number 17B. My 17A is going to be Keenan Allen, a guy who last year was on pace to finish as the number 6 receiver. From weeks 11 through 18, he was the wide receiver 4 in fantasy points per game. And another positive here, he has Justin Herbert, one of the young and rising quarterbacks, a top 10 quarterback here in the NFL. And not to mention, Justin Herbert's going to be looking for a new contract. So if Justin Herbert's going to have a year where he needs to explode and get that money, this is going to be the year to do it. Not to mention, this offense is getting even more firepower, as Kellen Moore is going to be the new offensive coordinator. Have all your questions, have all your doubts, but for fantasy purposes, he's coming from Dallas, which they had a very pass-happy scheme. He's bringing that to a team that is loaded with offensive weapons. So you can only imagine Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, now Quentin Johnson, the rookie there out of TCU. They're all going to get a lot of production this season, which at the same time might be a worry there, as there's a lot more competition. We do have to worry about Keenan Allen's health, as he's not the most durable guy, as we saw even last season, right? But if he's healthy and he's on the field, he's a wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 for me in 2023. Number 16 for me might be a questionable pick for a rookie that is going to be looking to take that superstardom second-year leap that we love to see out of young wide receivers. I'm going to bet on his potential. Chris Olave is my number 16, as last year he had 67 catches, almost 1,000 yards with Andy Dalton as his majority quarterback. This year he has Derek Carr, so no doubt the best quarterback he's had in his young career so far. And you know, like I said, he's trying to take that second-year superstardom leap. If he can do that, strictly basing off his upside with his pick, I believe he could be a wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3. The negatives here, he does have Michael Thomas. He does have Alvin Kamara as well in this offense, which both of those guys have questions on if they're going to be on the field or not. But if they are on the field, they do require tons of targets, tons of attention, and that could always take away fantasy production here from Chris Olave in year number 2. Another question is, can Derek Carr bounce back? That's a question you have to ask yourself on draft day. Can Derek Carr bounce back with these options in a new change of scenery? If he can, Chris Olave, like I mentioned, can be a high-end wide receiver 2 for us in 2023. Number 15 for me might be a shock to most people, but if you look at it, the deeper and deeper you dive into it, number 15 makes a lot of sense here for me. For Mr. T. Higgins, it is a contract year. You know, whether if he's going to be playing for the Bengals or elsewhere next season, it is a contract year. He's going to be playing for a big contract. So you can only imagine his level of play is going to heighten right this season. Not to mention he has Joe Burrow. He's a part of one of, if not the best, passing offenses in the NFL. You know, we talked about it last week with Joe Mixon, but his possible suspension can only open targets here for T. Higgins in 2023. The negatives, though, there was a clear decline across his statistical board last season, as from year 1 with Jamar Chase to year 2 with Jamar Chase, the gap is continuing to widen. Jamar Chase is the clear alpha here in this wide receiver room. Does the gap continue to widen this year? Does T. Higgins become more of an afterthought than ever, especially as he might be out on his way out the door? That's a question you have to ask yourself, but I still believe he's going to be a pivotal part in this offense, especially with the suspensions looming with Joe Mixon. T. Higgins, to me, could be a very safe wide receiver 2 for you this upcoming season. DK Metcalf, number 14 for me. Look, his fantasy production has dropped 3 consecutive years. Last year, his number 16 finish was fueled by 3 big games where he had, in all 3 of those games, he had over 120 receiving yards, a couple touchdowns. So he's very boom or bust. At least that's what the stats would tell you. And, last season he had 6 weeks where he finished as the wide receiver 55 or lower. So there's a lot of risks here with DK Metcalf. Not to mention, they drafted maybe the best receiver in the entire draft class, Jackson Smith-Njigba. He's coming in. That's going to be even more competition and more targets you're taking away from possibly DK Metcalf's hands. But the positives. Last year, he was second among the league in the red zone targets among the wide receiver position. He is that alpha in that offense. He has touchdown potential every single play, which is one of those things I like to look for. As it's like, a guy like Tyler Lockett, they make fun of him for it. But when he catches the ball, he's very safe. He gets down to the ground, ready for the next play. DK Metcalf, he catches it, he's looking for a touchdown. Every single play, how can I make that happen? We love to see that here for fantasy players. And that basically that leads me to my next point, where if we talked about Geno Smith before, you guys said I had him too low, but to me, if you believe in Geno Smith, you believe in DK Metcalf, and if that is true, he's going to be a wide receiver 2 for you here in 2023. The number 13 for me might be the hardest player I had to rank here on today's list, as Deebo Samuel comes in at my number 13 spot, as in 2020, he was the number 96 wide receiver. Granted, he only played 7 games, but in 2021, he had that monster year. He finished as the number 3 receiver in the entire league as far as fantasy production. But last year, he was the number 37 wide receiver, where if he on a 17-game slate, he was only on pace for number 20. So he's been everywhere here in these last 3 seasons. I will say for the positives, though, no matter who his quarterback is, he is going to be that check down specialist yet again this season, which is a good and bad thing. I will say, just like DK Metcalf, he has that touchdown potential on every single play, every single time he touches the ball. You have the small belief in your mind he can take that all the way. At times I believe he still could be used in that wide back role that he was in 2021 when he finished as the number 3 player. But the negatives here, without his rushing production, he fell into a wide receiver 3 role last season for our fantasy teams. He was a reach of a pick here in the second round last year. I believe the negatives here is if Trey Lance gets the start, that's only going to hurt Deebo Samuel here in 2023. At the end of the day, he's a safe wide receiver 2. I might have him too high in these rankings, but at the end of the day, Deebo Samuel is an amazing talent, and the potential is always there to be a top 10, top 8 wide receiver here for us this upcoming year. Number 12 for me might be a shock, but Devontae Smith, a guy who finished as the number 9 receiver in his sophomore campaign. The positives, he's coming off of his best career year. He's looking to take that extra leap, another leap in his game in one of the best offenses in the NFL. He gets to play wide receiver 2 next to A.J. Brown yet again, which, again, we saw it last season. That only means that A.J. Brown's taking the dominant corner at each and every game, each and every play. Devontae Smith is going to be facing the lesser of the 2 DBs on every single team. So that's better for us fantasy players, right? As we've seen last season, he can have a top 10 finish type of year. He also has Jalen Hurts. He's a very safe pick in my mind. It's a former Heisman who, to me, could be a very low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. My only question for me, and the only question you have to ask yourself on draft day is, do you believe this offense can repeat their production from last season? Do you believe Jalen Hurts is the real deal? Which might sound like a silly question, but still, you got to ask yourself that. Do you believe he can repeat his MVP level year and get 2,000-yard wide receivers? I believe he can, and I believe with that being said, he's still a wide receiver 1 for me this upcoming year in fantasy football. At my number 10B spot, yes, this would be 11, but I'm cheating yet again here on this list. That's how tight these wide receivers are. But my 10B is going to be Jalen Waddle, a guy who finished as a wide receiver 1 in his first 2 years as a pro. So right there, that alone might be enough validation to make this draft pick, right? But the positives here is under Tyreek Hill last season, Jalen Waddle was still 10th in yards after catch, 7th in yards, and 11th in total touchdowns among the league. If Tyreek this season shows any signs of slowing down, which I don't believe he will, but if he shows any signs of slowing down, Waddle's going to be the alpha in this offense. He's going to take a step up as his potential is only rising here in the NFL as we're seeing. I believe if Tua's back, it's going to be a very pass-heavy offense like we've seen last season. Mike McDaniel is a genius in getting his playmakers the ball, and I believe that's not going to change here from year 1 to year 2 with Mike McDaniel. It might even get more dangerous. I believe Jaylen Waddle, he only needs one play to be fantasy relevant each and every week, which is the reason I love him, right? I mean, Jaylen Waddle had a couple of those games last year where you started him, and it's the third quarter, and he's got 2 catches, 12 yards. And it's like, man, what is Jaylen Waddle doing? This is stupid. I'm a terrible fantasy manager. Why did I start him? And then boom, catches the little screen pass or catches a fly route. Gone. 60, 70-yard touchdown. Boom, you got 10, 12 points out of him, and you're super happy. You're like, man, it could have been a bad situation, but now I'm a genius because I started Jaylen Waddle who has 15 points as my wide receiver 2 or 3, right? But Jaylen Waddle, the only negatives here, the only thing you have to worry about is Tua's health. It makes Jaylen Waddle a very boomer bust product or player here in fantasy football, as it's, do you believe he can, if Tua's on the field, do you believe he's going to be back to where we saw Tua last season? Do you believe he can have those explosive games? Jaylen Waddle, if so, is going to be a big part of that, and he's going to be a very relevant fantasy wide receiver, as to me, there's just 10 guys that I believe can either be similar production or better than him in 2023. We're going to recap here. My 20 through 16 goes as follows. We're going to have Calvin Ridley, Amari Cooper, DeAndre Hopkins, Keenan Allen, and Chris Olave, betting on that second-year jump. Number 15 through 10, we're going to have T. Higgins, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, Devontae Smith, and Jaylen Waddle, who again is my 10B, as you'll see who he's tied with here in a couple weeks here. But that's going to do it for today's show. Again, a quick plug to check out our podcast, man. As my co-host and I, we release a podcast every Tuesday and Thursday talking about the greatest and latest sports news. It's backwards there, but a lot of NBA talk, a lot of playoff talk, especially as of right now. So if you're interested, just give us a listen, as we would greatly appreciate it. But that's going to do it. Another great fantasy episode in the books. We'll be back Friday with the 20 through 11 tight ends. Might be a quicker episode, as tight ends are the last year had a bad year, right? We'll see if they can bounce back in 2023. But we'll be back with tight ends on Friday and then a mock draft. So we'll see you guys Friday. Have a good one. I'm out.